Hello, welcome to my first lecture on Caribbean and African American literature. The first aspect to consider is the scope of the course. This course is closely linked to slave trade and slavery. It focuses on how Africans suffered in the diaspora. They were taken to America and the Caribbeans to work in the plantations. And at the end of slave trade and slavery, they were left stranded in the foreign lands. Let's work on the geographical area associated with the Atlantic slave trade. Remember, there was East African slave trade and West African slave trade. This course is aligned with the West African slave trade. So in Africa, the concentration was on West Africa. This means that West Africa was the source of slaves, whilst their destinations were North America and the Caribbean islands. The destinations that we are talking of need to be a little bit elaborated on. The first one, America, it was not the whole of America, but the area known as the Black Belt, which is in the deep south. Then we have the Caribbean regions. When you are looking at the Caribbean countries, the islands, you also need to identify the areas for Caribbean writers. There you are, the map which is showing the Caribbean islands. The Caribbean islands are situated within the Caribbean Sea. That is the area which is shaded in red on the map. This map is giving you more information on the islands. You can see them. We have the Dominican Republic, we have Haiti, we have Jamaica, and the like. And when we are also going to look at the major writers, you also need to use this map to see where they were coming from. This map is showing the Deep South, the area that was concentrated with the slaves. It was also known as the Black Belt for two reasons. The slave being black in color, hence the Black Belt, and also the soils in this region are deep black soils, rich soils, hence Black Belt again. Then let's look at the period of slave trade and slavery. You should know that slave trade is the trade, buying and selling of slaves. And then slavery, we are now talking of using other people ruthlessly without giving them money. So the period of slave trade started on a very limited scale at around the 12th century, but the increase was in the 16th century and the peak was in the 18th century. All right? this slave trade was abolished first in Britain. You know, the efforts of the likes of William Wilberforce, and then in America. But now the emancipation of slaves in America was in 1865. More information can be found from history textbooks on the Atlantic slave trade. You can read novels on slave trade and slavery. They give you authentic information. And thanks to the internet, for we can find throngs of valuable sources. Maybe you're wondering, why slaves from Africa? There was need for cheap labor for the plantations in America and the Caribbeans. And maybe you're also wondering, were they no people in America and the Caribbeans? They were there, the indigenous people were there, but they were scattered all over the places, so that development was difficult under such conditions. Another reason is that these indigenous people, especially the Red Indians in America, they were affected greatly by the diseases that were brought by the colonizers, that is the British, and they were dying in large numbers. So it means that it was not possible to use them for a long time. So what happened is that they came back on the table and tried to find out where could they find people who could stand the heat, the harsh conditions, and so on. And then a solution was found, that is Africans from Africa. Then everyone knows that slave trade is a bad thing, and they are wondering why it was not stopped. Yes, it was not stopped because those who were supposed to prevent it and stop it supported it. The religious leaders in Europe saw it as an opportunity to convert Africans to Christianity. And also the nobility of England found it fashionable to have black slaves for their prestige. As a result, those with the power to stop slave trade were sucked into it. Then let's look on how it developed. After it was agreed that the Europeans were now turning to Africa for slaves, the geography of Africa was thoroughly studied. Then the landforms of each market zone, that is the market zone for the slaves, were also studied. And then people from various kingdoms in Africa and the treatment that they needed was also worked on. For instance, those from Dahomey, they were actually nicknamed as popos during that time. You know, the characteristic of a popo. They were soft, they were easy to capture, and even when they were taken to the Americas and the Caribbeans, they could work hard in the farms without posing any problems to the slave masters. Maybe we can contrast these ones with those from Gambia. They were nicknamed the rascals. Those ones. They were very difficult to capture. And even when they were captured and transported to the diaspora, they could not work wholeheartedly. and scenarios of breaking equipment and the like was common. So this is how it developed with these studies and so on. And then after that, slaves were taken in large numbers. I tell you, in large numbers, from Africa to these destinations that we've talked of. Then maybe you're now wondering who was on demand as a slave. All the able-bodied working people were needed as slaves. The young people, they were needed mainly because they could stand the horrors of the mid-Atlantic passage. That means during the transshipment of slaves from West Africa to their destination. Young men were needed mainly because they could work in the plantations. In fact, the young men were the main workers in the plantations. Then the female were also needed. Their biology made them victim for sexual gratification for the white slave traders along the way from Africa beyond the seas. And even when they were in their destinations, they were sexually abused. So the slave owners liked this. The other reason why they wanted female slaves is that they wanted them for reproduction. May you take note of the term reproduction which I am using. This means that the slaves were not taken as people, but as animals. They were needed for them to breed more slaves for the white masters. Let's look at the plantations themselves. America was a colony of Britain. Then the other European countries had their shares, especially in the Caribbean islands. These areas, that is America and the Caribbean islands, are within the tropics. The climate is good for crop production. At the same time, these areas had fertile lands and the land was in abundance, hence the plantation agriculture. Then the crops that were grown, they varied from sugarcane, from cotton. We have tobacco, maybe you even know Virginia in America. It was a stronghold for tobacco. And these lands were very large. One plantation could be as large as 80 or even 100 hectares. These crops that were grown were meant for export. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for lecture 2.